everyone. This is an May 4th, 2021 work session of the Portland City Council. Today, obviously, this is our first major work session on the proposed budget. I'm now convening this meeting of the City of Portland Budget Committee. Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Rubio.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Colleagues, in our first convening of the Budget Committee, there's some formalities that are required by state law. I'm delivering both my proposed budget and my proposed budget message as required by Oregon statute. These documents have been delivered to you as part of the materials for this meeting, and the full document is available online at the City Budget Office website at www.portlandoregon.gov/CBO. With regard to the budget message, there are signs Portland is beginning to overcome the economic and human impacts of the global pandemic, including increased vaccine distribution and the reopening of schools. But though we are on the path to recovery, key variables remain uncertain, and the impacts continue. While the demand for city services continues to increase, the city lost over $100 million to the pandemic, including a projected deficit of over $20 million in the city's general fund, which supports many core programs and services. Because of the pandemic-caused shortfalls, my fall guidance asked bureaus, apart from the Joint Office of Homeless Services, to show how they would take a 5% cut in fiscal year 2021-22. I asked bureaus to protect proven community-facing programs from cuts and to focus on eliminating duplicative, unnecessary, or ineffective expenses. Our bureaus, I think, did a really great job in finding ways to save money and to invest in high priority needs. In January, my colleagues and I identified 3 priorities for the next 12 to 18 months: addressing homelessness, community safety, and economic recovery. And we reaffirmed the commitment we made last summer to center equity and climate in our COVID response, as well as in our recovery efforts. Our community will receive federal support from the American Rescue Plan Act, allowing us to strategically invest in the city's core priorities and lay the foundation for a sustainable, equitable recovery. We anticipate a large installment of these funds in May and a second installment early in 2022. My proposed budget commits just under $30 million of anticipated first-round rescue plan investments to core priorities. The remaining 70% of the funds will be allocated by the City Council later this summer. In terms of just a few of the highlights of the proposed budget, my proposed budget accepts over $15 million of the cuts bureaus proposed to help close our $20 million budget deficit. To prioritize programs and services with the greatest community impact, I made the difficult decision to freeze cost of living adjustments and merit increases for many city staff. I want to be clear that I'm very grateful for our employees, for the hard work they do, and their continued service during a very difficult time. Many small businesses, as you know, closed in 2020. Bringing them back and creating space for new ones, especially those owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color owners, is the key to a successful and equitable recovery. Funds for the Ankeny Food Cart Project, our minority business chambers, our inclusive business resource network, small business repair grants, and streamlined permitting at our Bureau of Development Services will all help to advance these important goals. With regard to homelessness, the need for homeless services has increased dramatically, and so has our investment. This year brings record investments in the county, city housing and homelessness system. My fall guidance exempted the Joint Office of Homeless Services from cuts, and the city continues to fully fund the office, including new resources for shelter development and services for transgender people experiencing homelessness, amongst other services. And I've continued to fund citywide access to hygiene stations. Hygiene is a basic human right, and in this pandemic, we must ensure this essential service is available to our neighbors experiencing homelessness. With regard to community safety, my budget supports urgent action towards an improved system of community safety by creating a community safety transition program. Our public safety bureaus contributed resources to staff the program, and I've added funds for community engagement. The program's initial work plan includes the broad categories of systems change, operational change, and identifying new strategies. The transition director will help implement the immediate gun violence plan council adopted this past month, and partners with the Office of Violence Prevention, community-based organizations, and the council to develop a citywide approach to the virus of gun violence that claimed over 40 lives in our community in 2020, including 24 people of color. With regard to equity, my budget increases resources for a community-directed budgeting project led by Reimagine Oregon. The fund was established last year with money reallocated from the Police Bureau. The directors of our Office of Equity and Human Rights, Office of Civic and Community Life, and City Budget Office will contribute expertise and resources to ensure the process is both transparent as well as accountable. Internally, I've added equity-focused positions in bureaus, supported our employee affinity groups with resources for training and other actions, and directed our human resources director to improve our recruitment, retention, and promotion of Black employees. The City Council's top priorities are safety, homelessness, and economic recovery. The investments that I've proposed reflect the city's core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility. Our responsibility this year is to ground ourselves in these values and to thoughtfully, carefully reorient our resources to invest in high-value actions that will help us to begin to build back better. The budget I've proposed reflects my commitment to meaningful change and my optimism for Portland's brighter future. And with that, colleagues, I'll turn it over to Jessica Kennard, the Budget Director, to facilitate today's work session. Good morning, Director Kennard.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, members of Council. Christina in the clerk's office, would you mind pulling up the slideshow that we sent to you, please? Thank you. We can go ahead to the next slide. So as the Mayor mentioned, this is our first convening as the Council as the Budget Committee. Over the next two weeks, we will convene 3 times as the Budget Committee. First at this work session, next we will convene tomorrow as to receive public testimony tomorrow evening. And then finally, we'll convene as the Budget Committee next Thursday, the 13th, to approve the budget, to offer amendments and approve the budget. The agenda for today is in front of you. The Mayor has convened us as the Budget Committee and delivered the Mayor's message. I will provide a brief financial outlook and overview of how the Mayor's proposed budget balances. I will spend a little bit of time talking about specific set-aside and resource allocations with the capital set-aside, the Recreational Cannabis Fund resources, and the American Rescue Plan resources. There will be a conversation around some technical changes that bureaus have entered and we have filed as part of our approved budget filing that I want to be sure that everyone is aware of and is able to ask questions around. We will review budget notes, and then we will have a discussion of, we don't need to have a discussion fully of amendments. This is meant to say just a discussion of changes to the proposed budget that Council is interested in talking about at this point in time as we work towards an approved budget where Council will offer amendments. And then finally, as part of Oregon statute, we will need to continue the Budget Committee meeting to tomorrow when you will take public testimony. Questions can be asked at any time, as is typical of our budget work sessions. Please feel free to jump in with questions throughout the conversation today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start by saying a little bit about our financial outlook. As you all know, you know this well. We began this process with about a little more than a $20 million general fund shortfall in February. We typically update the forecast in April, at the end of April. However, that forecast remains unchanged from the February release, and that is predominantly because of the delay in the federal tax filing deadline. We get a significant amount of our business license tax returns typically right around that deadline. And so we don't have that data and that information yet, which would inform an update to the forecast. Our city economist, Josh Harwood, did look at other revenue streams and noted some marginal changes in utility license free revenue and property tax revenue. They predominantly offset each other. So he is keeping the forecast at that $20.2 million shortfall. He notes that there is more upside risk than downside risk. If there was more downside risk, he probably would have adjusted it downwards. But given there's a little more upside risk, he feels comfortable leaving it where it is, and we will update it in advance of the fall bump next fall. If there are any questions, Josh is on the line and can answer questions. Next slide, please. So in terms of how the mayor's proposed budget balanced to that $20.2 million shortfall, the budget, as the mayor mentioned in his message, predominantly balanced by accepting those 5% bureau constraints, or up to 5% bureau constraints, I should say, accepting about $15 million, $15.1 million to be exact, in bureau cuts. Additionally, the mayor's budget does assume reductions associated with wage freezes for open contracts and for non-represented employees. And then there was about $2 million of excess one-time software contingency funds that we were able to redeploy to help balance. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that was created by the Economic Stimulus and Relief Coordinating Council, and it was shared. It's been shared with the Coordinating Council, and I believe it was shared with Council during the April 1st budget work session. It's the allocation framework that we've been discussing with regards to the ARP resources. Due to the urgency behind certain allocation decisions and the shortfall experience in the general fund and across other city funds, there's been an expectation that certain high priority allocations will be funded through the assumed allocation of ARP resources in the budget process. While some items were expected to be funded out of the ARP in the budget, it's been expected also that the majority of the first tranche resource allocation will go through the Coordinating Council's review and recommendation process and be brought back to the Council for their consideration, for your consideration and your voting later this summer. Next slide, please. So the mayor's proposed budget allocates $29.3 million of this first tranche in ARP funds, which is about 27% of the expected first tranche resources, and leaves about $79.5 million for the Coordinating Council process. The mayor's proposed budget also commits up to $8.3 million in second tranche resources to help stabilize BDS services. The slide shows a list of the direct allocations of ARP included in the mayor's proposed budget. But because we do not yet have the full eligibility rules from the federal treasury, we are conservative in our approach to allocating direct funds, and only did so when we felt confident around likely eligibility. The mayor's proposed budget also includes $14.3 million in support for COVID-19 related revenue loss to the general fund to help with continuity of operations. Relying on ARP resources to offset COVID-19 related revenue loss has helped ensure the proposed budget funding for activities and to help support these funding for activities aligned with council's shared priorities. I do want to highlight that, in fact, a number of the items that are supported in the mayor's proposed budget could likely be directly eligible for ARP allocations, but we wanted to see the final eligibility rules before making that determination. And we expect to see and receive those final rules next week. And if we need to make some technical adjustments to these allocations, we can do so as part of the approved phase of the budget. Next slide, please. So I want to talk briefly about our capital set-aside allocation. We had about $4.2 million available in our capital set-aside pool of resource. This is by city policy. We set aside approximately half of our one-time available general fund resources towards this process. And as it relates to excess balance from last fiscal year, we ended up depositing about $4.2 million into this account last fall. So that funding is available for allocation to major maintenance, critical major maintenance needs in a number of our bureaus across the city. Bureau submitted 9 projects totaling $12 million. The $4.2 million thus funds a little around a third of the requests that were and we also know that these requests were substantially lower than what had been requested in the past, probably because of the limited allocation of funding and also because of an abbreviated process that we ran after last year's opportunity was foregone due to the opportunity to allocate capital set aside was foregone due to the lack of resource during COVID-19. So what's included in the mayor's proposed budget are the requests from the Bureau of Transportation for ADA compliant curb ramps. This delivers up to 200 compliant curb ramps, and the settlement, it's as a result of a settlement that the city entered into, which requires the Bureau of Transportation to complete 1,500 corners annually for 12 years for a total of 18,000 curb ramps. PBOT also receives $1 million annually from the general fund for this program, and they have received a commitment of $10.5 million in Build Portland funding, and they're also committing their own general transportation resources. It's a sizable project that they're undertaking. In addition, the Bureau of Transportation also is receiving funding in the mayor's proposed budget for safety improvements at Southeast Foster and Southeast 110th and 11th. We have our new capital set aside process requires that bureaus do a cost benefit analysis as part of this process, and this had a cost benefit ratio of 102 to 1, meaning that the benefits outweighed the costs of an estimated ratio of 102 to 1. So it was our highest scoring project. It funds the replacement of signal heads, hardware, controllers with high visibility equipment, and increased programmability. It includes updating pedestrian crossings and lighting. Between 2010 and 2017, there have been 15 injuries and 2 fatalities within the area controlled by these signals. And the area also has a high score on PBOT's equity matrix. The mayor's proposed budget also includes funding for Portland Parks and Recreation's energy savings performance contract at the East Portland Community Center. The Bureau submitted a full request of $2.75 million, but given the limited funding in capital set aside, the project was allocated $1.1 million. This will replace an obsolete boiler with a more energy efficient one. It'll modernize lighting to energy efficient LEDs. It will replace, it will implement indoor air quality resiliency improvements. And then finally, the Water Bureau is receiving about $410,000 for ADA barrier removal at 7 hydroparks located across the city. The cost to benefit ratio is 5.7 to 1 of this project. 5 of the 7 parks do not have a Portland Parks and Recreation Park within a half mile. So these are presumed to function as sort of a critical open space for a lot of areas and neighborhoods. I do want to mention that there was a recent change in the West Burnside project that had been submitted by the Bureau of Transportation and included in the CBO recommendations. So the Bureau discovered in mid-April that the county is intending on replacing the signal and lighting at West Burnside and Second as part of the bridge replacement project. The original priority and project that had been submitted by Transportation had been to provide safety improvements at 2nd and 3rd intersections. So the project changed slightly, although the Bureau has since noted that similar improvements are also needed at the intersection of 4 streets. So the project's not funded in the current budget. The energy savings performance contract and the Water Bureau ADA barrier removal are included instead. But I want to clarify that this additional information has been coming to us and evolving in the last month. I think that, I would just note again that capital set aside is the allocation of resources is not nearly sufficient to meet these needs. These are often very critical and important projects. And council may always choose to allocate additional general fund resources or other eligible resources to help support these projects if there's interest. Next slide, please. The Recreational Cannabis Fund has we anticipate about $3 million in available resource in that pool of resource. The mayor's proposed budget has directed me to help facilitate an all-council decision-making process leading up to the approved budget. I have met twice with council office staff, and we have 2 more meetings before the approved budget next week, with the hopes of coming to a consensus agreement on what packages all of council would like to support and see supported with this $3 million. The list of projects that were submitted for these funds is on this slide. In addition, council offices can consider other eligible projects and eligible uses, which we're talking about with your offices. Yes, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Director Kennard. I'm curious, is this the total resources that we receive in the city for cannabis tax dollars?
No, the total allocation is greater, and I will look that number up for you. I believe it's around $6 million is the total budget. It's between $6 and $7 million now is the annual allocation of cannabis fund resources, but a portion of that is already committed to ongoing projects.
And that was going to be my next question is how does this impact the grants that have already gone out that are multi-year grants that are managed by the Office of Civic Life?
So the Office of Community and Civic Life has an ongoing allocation of cannabis fund resources, and I believe their ongoing allocation is around $1 million. Plus they have $1.9 million for the Reimagine Oregon process. So that is assumed in the base budget. This is in addition to what has already been assumed as ongoing allocations that were approved in prior cycles.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. With that, I think we will move on to discuss, next slide, please, Christina. So right now I'm going to pivot to talk about some of the changes and of course, we can go back to questions related to what's in the mayor's proposed, particularly as it pertains to additional changes that the council would like to discuss or talk about. I'm going to talk with you right now about some technical changes that bureaus have entered into the budget and that will be coming as part of the approved budget. I want to make sure everybody's aware while we think these are technical in nature. If there are any concerns or questions around these changes that bureaus have made, we want to daylight those now and get you the information that you need. So Christina, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing, I'm going to ask a member of my staff to pull up a spreadsheet. This is one of the documents for members of council that was emailed to you last night. It's called our change memo, which is a memo that explains changes to the budget. So I'll briefly walk through what's in here. So there are a few changes in the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Office of the City Attorney that relates to an increased assessed need for legal services for Portland Harbor Fund cleanup. So what you see in this first line is the recognition on the part of the Attorney's Office of funding from the Bureau of Environmental Services to pay for legal services related to harbor cleanup. So BES is sending money to the City Attorney to pay for an additional attorney to help with their legal services. Next one down are some changes within the Portland Parks and Recreation. So the Bureau is converting a limited term position to a full-time equivalent permanent position to fund a carpenter that performs non-capital ADA improvements. The position was previously funded on a one-time basis as part of a pilot, but it is funded by a general fund, ongoing general fund resource, which has been already allocated for ADA transition planning. So they're just making that position permanent. Parks Capital Improvement Program Fund, the Bureau's eliminating a long-time vacant position that they haven't filled for a long time. They're just technically eliminating or abolishing that position. Next, within the Office of Management and Finance, the Bureau is appropriating $1.9 million of bond revenue to continue their work on the initial rollout of the integrated tax system project. It's a large project that we've been working on for a couple of years. So this is part of a financing plan that they already have in place. They're just making sure the resources are available to continue that work. Within the Grants Fund, every year we must issue a one-day loan to make sure that the grants fund has a positive cash balance. This is because a lot of our receipts of particularly federal resources, we only receive money on a reimbursement basis. So oftentimes that fund carries a negative cash balance. We can't have, for accounting rules, we can't have a negative cash balance at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, we always do a one-day loan, internal loan from other funds across the city. This year, we believe that loan will need to be around $30 million, or at maximum $30 million. And so we are budgeting the authority to do that loan right now. And so the grants fund is recognizing $30 million. About $25 million of that will be a one-day loan from the Portland Bureau of Transportation. They are the largest recipient outside of the ARP process. They're the largest recipient typically of federal grants. So they're loaning $25 million, and then the General Reserve is loaning $5 million for this one-day loan. Next, we have a handful of changes within the Portland Housing Bureau. They do a series of sort of technical true-ups for primarily for their grant funding programs and their large capital plans. So within the Housing Investment Fund, they're adding interfund transfers to manage cash for the Portland Bond and the Metro Grant Housing Program delivery. In the grants fund, they're adding remaining emergency rental assistance program funds to next year's budget. So you'll recall there was an ordinance that council considered, I think about a month ago, or maybe more recently, that allocated some of this ERAP, this emergency rental assistance program funds. The Bureau is retaining about $5 million in the current year. They're planning on getting about $5 million out, and they're moving about a little over $14 million into next year's budget to be sure that it's available on July 1 at the start of this new fiscal year. The CDBG fund, the Bureau's rebudgeting community development block grants to continue community assistance and rebudget various affordable housing projects. Home grant fund reductions to to opportunity funds reflecting lower than anticipated HUD allocation. Within the TIF fund, the tax increment financing reimbursement fund, they're rebudgeting several affordable housing projects and aligning opportunity funds. Then the inclusionary housing fund, they're adjusting funds for pre-development loans for potential Metro grant housing projects. In the housing property fund, they're making revisions, small revisions to apartment building operating budgets. And then finally, in the affordable housing development fund, they're rebudgeting several affordable housing projects to reflect their adjusted closing and construction schedules. Finally, actually it's not finally, but we're getting close to the end here. Portland Bureau of Transportation, this is the other side of that interfund loan I was discussing. So the Bureau of Transportation is loaning $25 million for one day to the grants fund to make sure they have a positive cash balance on June 30th. And they are also adding 2 positions, one of which is an administrative specialist in the streetcar program that was mistakenly cut. And also a supervisor position in parking operations that's funded with an offsetting reduction in external materials and services. So these are net neutral changes. And then finally, the Bureau of Environmental Services, as I mentioned, is reallocating $360,000 internally to pay for additional attorney services related to Portland Harbor. And then the funds and debt management is that the other side of, again, that internal loan. The General Reserve Fund is loaning $5 million to make sure we have a positive cash balance in the grants fund. So those are all the technical adjustments. Are there any questions around any of those? Okay, great. Okay, next I am going to talk briefly about budget notes that are contained in the mayor's proposed budget. So budget notes are an opportunity for council to give policy or program direction to bureaus as part of the budget process. They often direct a report, a collaborative effort, or a work session to take place. They can direct the city budget office to make a change to a future year's base budget via directing a future CAL adjustment or current appropriation level adjustment. We list budget notes under the bureau that is implicated in the note, as you'll see in this document. Some notes appear multiple times in the filing document because they implicate several bureaus. There are 14 notes included in the mayor's proposed budget, and council may offer amendments to these notes and the addition of new notes as part of the approved budget. So I'll walk briefly through these at a high level. I'm not going to read all of them, but I just want to be sure that council's aware of what's in here. So the first one here is within the city budget office. There are several bureaus implicated in this note. It is essentially acknowledging that the expiring tax increment finance districts and returning property tax district revenue is a big financial issue. It impacts several bureaus and several projects and programs. So it's directing Prosper Portland, Portland Housing Bureau, Office Management and Finance, and the City Budget Office to provide options and recommendations to the council to consider how forecasted general fund resources, including these returning resources, will support cities' affordable housing, infrastructure maintenance, business, employment, and community development objectives, while also balancing the need to meet future general services. So the group of bureaus implicated in this note are asked to initiate a work session by November to discuss the options. Yes, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Director Connaught. I'm just curious, is it normal to have the bureaus that are most impacted developing a proposal rather than actually providing information into a process? I'm very concerned that we continue to put these small groups together that actually are making major policy recommendations without the impact of actually elected leaders having an opportunity to weigh in the process. We've known that this TIF cliff was coming for a long time, and I am disappointed that the bureaus haven't been working on this prior to now. And I'm concerned that we have the people that have the bureaus that have the most at stake actually leading an effort to tell us how we get out of this mess that we're in.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. And again, if there's another if there's another body or group that you would like to see involved in this process, certainly that can be offered as amendment. I would offer that particularly Prosper Portland and the City Budget Office also, in addition to having our own views about where we would like to see the funding go, we do also manage aspects of this resource. So Prosper Portland has the forecasting related to the expiration of resources. So we rely on Prosper Portland for that technical information, and then the City Budget Office does provide forecasting. So there's a technical component to this as well.
Yes.
And I think each of these.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Director. I appreciate the technical component, and I actually expect them to provide us with the technical information to make a good decision. I just don't expect them to lead the effort to get us to the decision that we're making.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely interested in hearing from you as my bureau, and I am implicated in this. I'm definitely interested in hearing from you on how you would like to, what type of information you'd like to see and how you'd like to see the process go. And if there's anybody else that you'd like to be involved in this process, certainly we can discuss that. Okay. So the next item is another note that implicates a number of bureaus. It is acknowledging the number of calls that are calls for service for medical calls within Portland Fire and Rescue, and asking that the community safety director work with Portland Fire and Rescue, Bureau of Emergency Communication, and the City Budget Office to issue a report to council that identifies some potential alternative delivery models that would provide more appropriate response to medical calls for service. Also included in this note is the direction for the City Budget Office next fall, not this coming fall, but the fall of 2022-23, to reduce the Fire Bureau's CAL, their current appropriation level budget, by the cost of the rapid response vehicles in preparation for the fiscal year 23-24 budget development. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It looks like the Commissioner Hardesty question and answer period. My apologies, but there's a bigger issue, and you're right. Most fire calls today are a medical response, but what is I think driving a lot of the calls that fire goes on is how we're subsidizing a private entity, AMR. AMR cannot do their job without firefighters subsidizing them. And I think that's the bigger conversation that must be had in this process. So I will be offering an amendment to actually expand what they're looking at when we're talking about the deployment of fire We also have businesses. OHSU is a great example that use fire as their own personal service, as does TriMet. So we have a bigger problem about who accesses 911 and whether or not we should be charging OHSU and TriMet and other overusers of our system. And I think that this is a conversation that's worth having, but it does not appear to be broad enough for us to actually get the information that we need around how we move fire forward into the future. So I appreciated seeing this note, but I'm concerned that it's very limited and is actually not addressing the real issue, which is us subsidizing private companies.
Mayor? You're still muted.
I don't disagree with Commissioner Hardesty at all. I think that's a slightly separate issue. It's an important one, though, and I want to be clear, Commissioner Hardesty, I'm in alignment with you on that. This gets at a slightly different issue around the effective allocation of resources. And I know Mike Myers is listening to this conversation, and ultimately he's going to be the one directing this work. And so I don't know, Mike, if you want to chime in on this, but I'm in alignment with Commissioner Hardesty's concerns there. I just think it's somewhat different than what we're talking about here in this specific budget note.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner Hardesty, for the question, at least the discussion. I think both of you are correct. There are clearly opportunities both at the low end of the scale on low acuity calls on whether we should have, a fire apparatus on a call that can be handled by a private ambulance company. The fire chief's been very clear that she wants to maintain readiness and make sure that, her team is ready to go to, handle all those all hazards. And I think your discussions about the higher end of those calls, the high acuity calls, those are your cardiac arrests or, the serious calls that require a lot of individuals across the spectrum on the call, where AMR is still transporting and getting paid, reimbursed for that call, where fire is not, but they are required to go. So I think there's a lot of discussion across the spectrum. I do understand the mayor's position on this particular item is specific, but there is room for further discussion, as always, when it comes to contracting out with public-private partnerships. And I'd be willing to engage either or both on those discussions and prepared to do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, as always. Yes, I look forward to us continuing this conversation.
Great. All right, if we could scroll down, please. Thank you. So there are two notes from the auditors, I'm sorry, not from the auditor's office, related to the auditor's office. The first is indicating that it's discussing the auditor's budget and their independent role. And it mentions that council will commit that it will only seek to reduce the auditor's general fund allocation as the city's general fund forecasts require citywide budget reductions in excess of $6 million. That the council will work with the auditor's office to identify acceptable reductions and will only reduce the auditor's budget at a level commensurate with other general fund bureaus. In cases where the auditor has consented to new or expanded responsibilities, or when code or voter approved changes dictate changes to the auditor's functions, council will work with the auditor to ensure a new scope of work. I will say that we have received feedback from the auditor, and the auditor actually does not want this note to be included, and has submitted some alternative language. And so we will share that alternative language with you. And I think it is in a separate document. So I'll see if I can pull that up once we get to the end of this document. We'll review the auditor's requested changes rather than jump back and forth between documents. And the auditor has also submitted some changes, requested changes to the independent police review note. So we'll review those at the end of this, after we go through all of the other notes here. Within the Portland Housing and Bureau, as they're also implicated in the TIF Cliff budget note, that note is under their heading as well. We have already discussed that. Within Prosper Portland, The Prosper Portland is receiving, through Prosper Portland, the Old Town Community Association, Old Town Chinatown Action Plan is receiving $60,000 as bridge funding to help pay for a district manager position. This budget note is just articulating that there was a council approval of a 5-year action plan that indicated that this position would be funded by the community association in the future. However, given the extenuating circumstances right now, general fund is included, but this note is stating that that it is the expectation that the funding commitment is for 1 year and the Old Town Community Association will be responsible for fully funding the position in future years. The next item is, again, the Tiffcliff item, which implicates Prosper Portland as well. Scroll down. This item within the Office of Management and Finance is for Enhanced Service District Community Engagement and Coordination. It's directing the CAO to hire a coordinator to meaningfully engage the community about services provided by ESDs and the impacts that the districts have on community. Also to establish clear, equitable criteria for the development and oversight of the districts, provide oversight and policy recommendations in line with the city core values. It also states that the CAO will provide a comprehensive review of the districts and report back to council on results of the review and their engagement process. It specifies particular elements of the deliverables that will be delivered to the council and the engagement process, rather. All right, the next item is acknowledging that Kirby Garage is functionally obsolete and is is recognizing that and recognizing the deficiencies and directing Office of Management and Finance to prepare a proposal this coming year to relocate city fleet for councils so that council can consider that proposal and think about it as part of next year's budget process. The next item is related to and a response to a report that was recently authorized by report that was recently provided by the CAN group, the city's African American Network group of employees. It's asking the Bureau of Human Resources to develop a program promoting equitable recruitment, retention, and promotion of African American Black employees across the city of Portland through changes in our hiring practices, mentorship programs, affinity spaces, and through mental health support. It's asking the BHR director to present the proposal and the additional resources required to implement changes to the council in a work session no later than September 30th of this fall.
Director Kennard, Commissioner Mapps and I met with Deep, I believe it was last week, and they were very concerned about this budget note because as you know, the CAN is the city's African American Network, and they, as volunteers, gathered data and presented it to the city council as well as to bureau directors. And if we are in fact a city that really is centering Black lives, it is important that the council hears directly from the volunteers who put that report together. I'm concerned that this item actually provides a solution without actually talking to the people who did the work to create the report. It looks like their voice is being minimized in this process. We have lost 40% of African American employees at the city of Portland over the last several years. And this is not, I do not believe that would be the solution to that problem, but I don't know because we haven't talked directly to the Black employees that have been most impacted. I will be providing a amendment, I think, to this section, actually requiring us to have a work session with the employees who volunteered and created that report and get ideas from them about what they believe it would take to create a safe, equitable, accountable work environment at the city of Portland. In my time here, Human Resources has not been a strong advocate for African American employees, and so I would be very concerned. So I guess I also have a question. There was $125,000 allocated, but I'm unclear if it actually is going to the affinity groups or if it's actually going to Human Resources to create this program.
So I see that Dr. Webster has joined us. Can she offer her thoughts and her comments? Is the committee all right with that? Okay.
I was going to say, who's Dr. Webster?
Yes, sorry. Good morning. There has been a change.
Good morning. You threw me there. Hi, Dr.
Sorry.
Webster. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, for everyone. Yes, sorry. I have shed a little bit of weight. And so now we are back to my original size. That's a good way to put it. So I just want to, and I don't know about the money part of this, but I just want to offer that sort of in the creation of the budget note, and this is something we can talk about maybe as an amendment. I just want to put it out there. I was advocating that we name CAN specifically as a part of this budget note, and my rationale behind that was to really honor the work that they had done to create that report and to share that report citywide, and that naming them specifically would also really solidify in my mind that we were making a commitment to do this in partnership with them.
Yes.
And so I just want to put that out there. It didn't end up in our final language here, but that is something that I think we do need to consider as we are thinking about how this is crafted. And as someone who sits in spaces with CAN and listens to the concerns of our Black and African American employees across the city, I do think it's very important that we are specific about what this partnership really needs to look like. So I just want to put that out there. And again, I'm not sure about the specifics in terms of the money, and so Jessica can probably speak more specifically to that. But I'll say that and shut up because I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to talk. I just raised my hand. So thank you.
Yeah, so the funding for the affinity groups is separate than the budget note. I think the budget note is directing the chief human resource officer to do some work to figure out what type of program and what type of funding they might need to support that activity. $125,000 is meant to bolster support for all of the city's affinity groups, and so that funding is budgeted in the Office of Equity and Human Rights as they support DEEP and they support those affinity groups.
Thank you for that. Let me just say that all affinity groups aren't equal. Some affinity groups are asked to do a whole lot for the city of Portland, and some don't. So equity is not everybody getting the same amount of money. Equity is investing where we believe we need to invest the most dollars, and so that we get the outcomes that we say we want. So again, I think we should have a broader conversation about what our intentions are around that.
Commissioner Matz?
Sure. As long as we're on this topic, it would help me if staff could just give us a brief background on the leadership funds, what the goals of that program is, and also I'd be curious to see if we've ever tried something like this before.
And Commissioner, when you say the leadership funds, are you referring
the 125?
The 125? Let's see, is somebody on from the mayor's office that can speak more to?
So Commissioner Maps, I think what I was just told that is the 125,000 was to be distributed among all the affinity groups.
Yes, I have that sense. Do we have any more details on this, or if we don't, we can pick it up at a different moment.
I'll just note real quick if I can jump in. I do think that at some point in time, we do need to talk individually to our affinity groups, because I do agree, like the programming and the needs and sort of, what that looks like vary depending on affinity group. And so I just want to, put that out there as well. And so that's not a specific in terms of like how this will be divided, Commissioner Maps. I don't think we've, sort of had that conversation, but I will say that there are particular affinity groups that sometimes have more ask than others. And, knowing that, this is funding that my office, helps to manage. So
Sure. Well, thank you. And I was kind of going in a different direction. I believe this program is based on a program that we've had in the past. It's my understanding that it was relatively successful. I believe that everyone who participated, regardless of which affinity group you're affiliated with, I get the impression that everyone who participated in that program managed to get rise up in the ranks of the city. So I realize this will help everybody, which is, I think, often a good thing. And I think this is also a program, if I understand it correctly, which has a history of actually helping people of color rise throughout our city bureaucracy. So I look forward to having a richer conversation about this in the future.
Commissioner Maps, I don't have that impression at all. I don't have an impression that anything that's come out of the Human Resources Bureau has been effective in actually mentoring, retaining, and advancing Black employees at the city of Portland. And the data that we just saw recently clearly reflects that. So I'm not sure why you think that we had something that worked. I mean, a couple of people did say they went through the leadership program, and they were two to be exact. And they actually did get a couple of promotions, but that's not reflective of the city at large.
Does this program live in human resources or someplace else?
The funding for the affinity group support is supported by the Office of Equity and Human Rights, which is the DEEP program.
Thank you.
Dr. Webster, do you have another question, or are we okay? All right. So we'll, let's see, scroll down here. The next item is related to a program evaluation of the Portland Street Response Program. So noting the pilot began in February, this time there's really limited data on the effectiveness of the pilot program, although they're collecting more data every day. This is directing, it says that the budget continues the funding for Portland Street Response at its current scale. Portland Street Response pilot's undergoing evaluation. There will be a 6 and 12-month report on the pilot. Budget note directs Portland Street Response to schedule a work session with the City Council after the 6 and 12-month marks of the program. And after this work session, City Council will be better informed to decide whether and how to expand the pilot. The budget note directs the Community Safety Transition Director to work with Portland Fire and Rescue to review the evaluation of the pilot and make recommendations about whether and how to expand the program, with options for council to consider how best to serve Portlanders. All right, we can scroll down to the next item. This was the one we've already discussed. This is the medical calls piece that also implicates the city budget office, as well as the next one is a TIF item that implicates several bureaus. Under the Bureau of Development Services, there is a note that essentially earmarks $8.3 million up to $8.3 million in second tranche federal stimulus ARP resources to prevent immediate layoffs and delay potential layoffs, and overall to sustain current service levels within the Bureau of Development Services. It does stipulate that that once the city receives its second tranche resources expected in the next spring, in the spring of 22, that the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services, which oversees the grants division and is overseeing the deployment of federal resources, that they will take a look at BDS's updated 5-year financial forecast. And if the forecast remains the same or is worse than what it is currently, that money will be allocated. That $8.3 million of ARP second tranche resources shall be allocated to backfill Bureau revenue loss. However, if the Development Services forecast has improved from its current state and the Bureau is not proposing layoffs, then Council may choose to allocate that funding towards other priorities. Go ahead and scroll down, please. Another budget note related to the Bureau of Development Services is it notes that the budget includes one-time general fund resources to support a community engagement specialist position within the Bureau. This was requested by the Bureau. It'll join the Bureau's equity and policy development team. The note stipulates that general fund resources are being provided on a one-time basis, but given that the Bureau is undergoing significant financial strain as a result of the economic impacts of COVID-19. However, the note stipulates that to ensure stability of this work in future years, the Bureau should prioritize internal resources towards this effort as part of its core operations, and then notes that additional general fund subsidies for the Bureau may be considered in the future to solve for continued financial challenges, but that this work is deemed essential and should be prioritized within the Bureau's base budget going forward. Scroll down, please. Within the Portland Police Bureau, there are a couple of budget notes. The first one directs the Portland Police Bureau to reinstate a staff sergeant at BOIC 911 to support call triage, which has been proven effective in helping resolve or otherwise redirect low priority calls for service that do not require a police response. And then the next note directs that the Police Bureau that the Police Bureau develop a plan to eliminate any vacant positions that are unsupported under the fiscal year 21-22 budget. So it notes that there are a number of vacancies within the Bureau that are unfunded, that don't have funding to back them. So it's directing the Bureau to develop a plan to eliminate what we refer to as abolish vacant positions that are unsupported. Such that the number of FTE that they have more accurately reflects the funding that they actually have to support those FTE. And that's directed to come back, the Police Bureau is directed to come back with this plan in time for the fall budget monitoring process. Scroll down, please.
I'm sorry, Director Kennard, I just wanted to be clear. These are the positions that were cut from the Portland Police Bureau's budget in the last budget process. Is that correct?
It's directing that the Police Bureau look across both positions that were unfunded last year, and any positions that may also be unfunded as a result of budget actions taken this year.
I'm sorry, I'm still not getting the answer that I'm looking for. Last year we cut 44 positions out of the Portland Police Bureau budget based on programs that we eliminated. Those 44 positions were cut last year. Are you saying that those positions that have already been cut, in addition to other vacant positions that aren't funded, is what this budget note articulates?
Yeah, and I would say that the budget note doesn't necessarily specify a number of positions that are expected to be eliminated. It does call attention to that they have over 100 sworn employees and 25 professional staff retiring. And so that precise number of what needs to be eliminated is part of what the plan should be that comes back to council. But presumably it should include the impacts of what the defunding that occurred in last budget cycle, as well as funding that's being removed from the Bureau's budget this cycle, because they have a number of vacancies, additional vacancies as a result of retirements.
Thank you for that, Director. I think more clarity may be needed in this budget note, because I want to be clear about specifically what positions are being cut so that we have something to measure against. Because I didn't see the current budget reflecting the positions that were eliminated last time, and I know there were 44. And so the budget note it is a little confusing for me. I just want to be clear that we're not assuming that the 44 that we cut are still part of that 100 that we've been talking about, right? Because they would not be part of the 100 if they were already cut by the council last year.
So I just received a just-in-time message from my analyst saying that actually those 44 positions were already eliminated from the Bureau's budget. They were abolished.
That's right.
So what we're talking about now are additional vacancies that are unsupported in the Bureau's budget.
Thank you. That's helpful. Just-in-time messaging. I like that.
All right. If we could scroll down, please. Is that the end? Is there any left? All right, I am guessing that is the end of the item. Let's see. Are we able to pull up the auditor's requested changes? We did receive these last night, so I didn't have the opportunity yet to share them with you. Christy, are you there? Uh-oh. We might have a driverless car here. Okay. I am going to ask the host, whoever the host is, if you can stop the screen share, please. Oh, never mind. It's happened. It's working again. Maybe there was. Okay. All right. Great. We've reviewed these for. We reviewed both of the Fire Bureau items already as part of the discussion of other Bureau items, as well as the first one for the Bureau of Emergency Communications. And then, and that one is also, the two for Bureau of Emergency Communications were also related to other ones we've already discussed. So that does complete those, the budget notes that were included in the mayor's proposed. I am going to just pull up really quickly. And Christy, are you, can you tell me if you're able to pull up the auditor's office? I can also do it. The auditor's requested changes, just so that
sure. I was just gonna get those for you, Jessica. I'll get
awesome. Thank you so much. While Christy's pulling those up, I want to flag for you that this is the last portion where I am really presenting to you. After this point, we will open the floor for discussion around any sort of changes any questions that council has, or any changes that you would like to begin discussion around with your colleagues. So you can start thinking about the types of things that you're going to want to discuss as a group. Okay.
Jessica, I can do whichever one you want first, and if you would like them bigger, please just let me know.
Yeah, please zoom in a little bit. So I see my face coming closer to the screen. Great. Thank you. Okay, so this is and we'll circulate this so council can review it. You can review it on your own, but given that the auditor shared this with us last night, I wanted to just daylight it here. So the auditor's suggested language is stating that City Council commits to preserving the existing positions in IPR as permanent, ongoing positions of the Auditor's Office to continue work on accountability and transparency matters, and acknowledges the importance of the positions. Council acknowledges the employees' experience and commitment to government accountability are worth preserving. The 14 positions will be assigned to civilian oversight of police in IPR through June 30th of 2023, giving council 2 fiscal years to implement a new voter-approved police oversight board. Thereafter, the employees will be assigned to accountability and transparency work in the auditor's office, which will be defined in the auditor's requested budget for fiscal year 23-24. Should council and the auditor determine the positions would be needed for up to 1 additional fiscal year to accommodate implementation of the new police oversight board, the fiscal year 23-24 budget will reflect their continued service in that role, their new role in the auditor's office, or a combination of these two. So, so again, this is what's in the mayor's proposed budget is what is in the budget currently. Council will need to take action to change the budget to amend what's in there. This is the auditor's request, is that this budget be substituted for what is currently in there in the independent police review. Yes, Commissioner Mapps.
I don't know if we have anyone from the auditor's office here today. Do you know?
I do not believe they were planning on attending.
Okay, just for the record, when and if this subject comes up again, it would be great to have some clarification from the auditor's office about what these 14 positions will do after the work that they have historically been doing goes away.
We can seek to get that information for you. Yes,
Thank
Commissioner. You. Yes, yeah, yes, Commissioner Hardesty.
I was just going to answer Commissioner Mapp's question. It was the proposed budget item that the auditor submitted that was not included in the mayor's budget.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And then Christy, is there the other one? Oh, this is the funding model. Okay. So this is the other also part of the auditor's budget proposal was to a request for council to direct the city budget office to increase the auditor's office's ongoing base budget beginning in fiscal year 21-22 by 1.5% each year for the next 5 years. And that the percentage increase assumes that the appropriation level is sustained over a 5-year period. Should there be a substantial reduction in the auditor's responsibilities, the model will require an adjustment. Funding the above percentage increase also may be requested if the auditor consents to new or expanded responsibilities. And it ensures the auditor's office has access to the resources it needs to meet its charter and code obligations. And as it does state that as required by state budget law, council will continue to decide the total amount of funding allocated to the auditor's office, but will not control its spending decisions. And so this is similar to what the auditor came to you to propose during the work sessions around the funding model and the funding sustainability. Yes, Commissioner Mapps.
Since I'm new here, can you contrast the formula the auditor proposes to determine the base budget for the auditor's office to the current formula that we use to determine the base budgets for different city bureaus?
Sure. So this would be additive. So this would be Josh Harwood, our economist, looks across the city at all our general fund allocations, our ongoing allocations to bureaus, and applies certain weighted inflationary increases based on the composition of each bureau, given materials and services inflationary factors, as well as personnel inflationary factors, health benefits, COLA increases, agreed to contract, employee contract increases, et cetera. And so all of that is loaded in all bureaus, including the auditor's bureau budget as part of the base budget. This would be an additional 1.5% that would be added on top of that process.
Thank you. Just, pardon me, Commissioner Rubio, just a quick follow-up. Do we do this with any other bureau in terms of having a special formula to determine the base budget?
I do not believe so. The only exception would be when council affirmatively votes for a change. So for example, when 311 was approved, council approved certain incremental changes that Josh was directed to load into the budget over a 3-year period. So there are certain agreements that council makes either through contracts or by voting for increases for specific projects where that is the case.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Rubio.
Hey, thanks. So I just want, again, I'm learning too, so I just want to be clear that I understand. So is what she's proposing here, is there any, since the original proposal from the auditor's office, after numerous conversations, has there been any collaboration on compromises or any reworking or some, is there anything new in this then, or is markedly different from the original proposal?
I have to admit that, we just got this last night, so I haven't looked deeply at it. It very closely resembles what I understood the original proposal to be. Nothing is standing out as remarkably different about what is written here with relation to the initial proposal, but I can seek additional clarity from the auditor and just confirm that fact.
Okay, I just know there's been a lot of conversations in between our work sessions and where we've had come together talk. So I'm just very interested in if there's been any progress through those conversations and in good faith to kind of find a way through. And then the second thing I wanted to ask also is, again, being new, can you help me understand, like, has there been a recurring issue or have there been any issues raised around budgeting in previous auditor offices? in terms of the same kinds of things that have been outlined? Budgeting specifically?
So I would need to look back at our records. This is one area where my somewhat limited tenure here, being here for 5 years, would hinder my answer. There have been a number of discussions amongst the council, between the council and the auditor, this auditor, over the last few years around allocations, and disagreements around the budget have happened on occasion over the last few years. The auditor did go to the voters, and the voters approved the auditor's independence as in a number of different forms and responsibilities. The crux of the issue is really that the council still retains the authority to allocate resources citywide, including allocate resources to the auditor's budget. And so this is the auditor's attempt to make sure that the independence of the office and her authority is maintained, while also navigating the fact that the council can make decisions around the budget allocation for her and her bureau.
Yeah, I understand that. I think my question is more, I'm looking if there's a structural issue where this has been a recurring thing, or is this the first time in our recent times that this budget situation has been raised by the auditor's office? But I'm happy to get that answer later.
This auditor has raised this issue, I would say, a number of times.
And previously,
in the last few years.
You don't know, previous to this auditor at the city.
I will look into that. Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
And the city did approve, last year, the city allowed the auditor to have their own reserve, whereby they get to keep up to $500,000 of their underspending, their general fund underspending, which, as you know, every other bureau must, their general fund falls to balance. And so the auditor does have a reserve to help bolster their availability of resources.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Hardesty.
Director Kennard. I was just going to add for Commissioner Rubio. The relationship between the city council and the auditor is really no different than the relationship between Multnomah County Board of County Commissioners and the sheriff. The sheriff is independently elected, but the county actually approves the budget. So it's not a unique situation. What's unique is what is being proposed. That wasn't asked for. That's what's unique. But this is not a unique situation. Last year the auditor actually requested to keep $1 million in underspending, and the council elected to vote to allow her to keep $500,000. And so she even presents it in a way as if like she was supposed to have that money, and we kept it, and we did not. It's unfortunate that the auditor chose not to be here and not present this and make the argument for why we should even consider it.
Okay. There are no more questions on this. I have taken note of your question, Commissioner Rubio, and I will look for any other historical information related to the auditor's office. And Christy, we can stop screen sharing now. And so the rest of the time is open for the council as the budget committee to discuss any other items, questions that you have, or things that you want to discuss in preparation for the approved, things that you might want to flag or discuss as changes that you'd like to see. Yes, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Chair Kennard. One theme that goes through the budget that concerns me is I stopped counting at 8 convenings for Black people to seek information. And I noticed several of them will come from the Office of Finance and Management. One will come from BDS. And there are a whole host of efforts My apology, my phone. My phone is doing things I did not anticipate it doing. I didn't know.
Music.
I'm sorry, it wasn't me, it was my phone. And so my concern is that as a city, I would expect the Office of Civic and Community Engagement would be the vehicle under which we would have a community engagement calendar produced, do outreach, and it looks like what we're doing is creating a lot of individual efforts that are supposed to help Black Portlanders. We are 6% of the overall population, and I think about all the meetings that we want people to come to for free to give their input, to provide guidance to the city. I think the way that it is proposed in the budget is honestly disrespectful to our community because it is not all tied into one understanding of all this community engagement effort that is supposed to take place. So I'm concerned that we're setting up a process that at the end of the day won't give us the information to make the structural institutional changes that we need to make because they will be so disparately out in the city. So that's my overall impression of all these groups. I also do not know still, and I've asked this question last year and I'm going to ask it again this year, where I can get a list to find out how many dollars we're investing in organizations when we have every bureau doing their own community engagement process, and some bureaus are providing resources to help organizations be at the table. Some bureaus aren't. Some bureaus get paid a stipend. Some efforts get paid a stipend, some don't. I am just very concerned that we're continuing to create chaos in an attempt to say that we can check a box that we've talked to Black folks. So I'll stop there.
Commissioner Maps.
Just building on Commissioner Hardesty's point, it might be helpful for me so I could understand this issue better if I can get a list of what these specific outreach efforts are and what their goals are. Are they internally focused, externally focused? Just so I have a better sense of the lay of the land.
Certainly, I can compile a list of the items that I'm aware of, and then perhaps Commissioner Hardesty, I can share that with you and cross-reference. And if there's other items that you have on your list, we can make sure that I've got the comprehensive
I'd like to have
list.
a list of organizations, community-based organizations that the City of Portland plans to funnel money into next year, so that we know whether or not we're supporting the same groups over and over again, or whether we're actually expanding our reach, whether we're providing opportunity to new emerging organizations, or we're just going with the status quo. And last year when we did the federal relief, it was really unclear to me who got the money. And I today still don't know who got the money, and I don't know how this budget actually deploys resources in a way. How do I know if it's fair and just and equitable if I don't even have a list of who's doing what? And we have all these disparate efforts in every bureau in a city, and it just feels very perfunctory as compared to actually working towards a common goal.
Commissioner, I can try to get a list of who we know are the grantees across the city that have received funding in this year. I don't know that we can prospectively look for. There's not like a database where we could collect data on looking forward, but I can at least get you some information on our current year allocations to community organizations.
Thank you. And I know with the spring bump, we allocated a lot of money that I'm not sure where that money's going to go. So I just don't know. I guess as a city, I guess my question is bigger than just this budget. It's just how do we know that we're actually having the impact that we say we're having when we have so many disparate efforts that are supposedly addressing a core city council issue? I look forward to your recommendations about what does the council need to know whether or not we are being effective and actually addressing our core issues.
Mhm.
And for me, it's information. It's knowing where the money's going, what we're asking people to do with the money, and whether or not we're having the outcomes that we're looking for.
Mhm. Okay.
And let me just say, I really feel bad for my new colleagues. I remember what it was like to have my first budget at the city of Portland. And I know that the budget office does an excellent job of trying to answer questions, but you don't know what questions to ask in your first budget. So I just really feel bad that that this feels so rushed that I really don't feel like that we've had enough time to really absorb what we're being asked to invest in. And so I just want to put that on the record. It's just my observation of how frustrating this budget process has been thus far.
Mayor, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So colleagues, just first of all, this is the form of government. And yes, it can be frustrating and it can be confusing. This is honoring requests that came through your bureaus. And so if people do not support these particular asks, I'm happy to entertain amending them out, but I just want to be clear. These aren't ideas that just popped into my head. These are ideas that were advocated for by bureaus themselves for specific outreach efforts related to the functions of those bureaus. I don't disagree with you, Commissioner Hardesty, that I'd like to see more of a holistic, thoughtful approach, particularly to what is effectively our grant-making function as a local city government. You know, I've gone on various tirades on that subject previously, but I do want people to understand this is an attempt on my part through the proposed to reflect and honor the requests that were put on the table through your bureau directors. And if people aren't comfortable with that, I certainly get it. This really gets to the form of government question and how confusing it can be. But I just wanted you to know that context. Moreover, I'd also direct your attention to something Director Reinhardt put into the chat here. He will create a full list of the CARES local relief funds and make sure that that gets to everybody.
Thank you very much. And Mayor, let me just speak for my bureaus, right? I got 2 new bureaus in January. If I had had those bureaus last year, I would have had a much better understanding of what they were asking you for, right? And I think my new colleagues are in the same position. So when we just get the bureaus in January, and now here we are in May, and we have a couple of weeks to pass a $6 billion budget, I do think that we need something to actually make sure that the onboarding we do with new commissioners actually is meaningful, and that all of us can have a meaningful voice in this budget. And so I just wanted to put that out there because that's what I'm hearing, and I'm hearing the frustration. But for me, that the piece that I talked about, which is if we're really committed to Black lives, then this seems a very disjointed effort to actually engage in policy and systems changes to have an impact on Black lives in Portland.
So in terms of the process, we have, today we have the work session. In the past, we have done the work session a week later, which has the benefit of allowing council members to have more time to review what's in the mayor's proposed, but has the shortfall of not of putting the work session really close, right up to about 2 days before the approved hearing. So it means you have limited time to talk about and construct amendments. So this year we're having it right now, with the intention of sort of daylighting and having an initial conversation around what's in the mayor's proposed budget. We can continue to have conversations, and you all continue to have conversations amongst yourselves around the types of changes that you would like to see over the next 10 days in advance, or 9 days, I should say, in advance of May 13th. You also will have the benefit of hearing from the public tomorrow evening during a 2-hour public hearing. And of course, I am available, as are my staff, to help you through this process as best we can. I do know that it is a lot of information. There are over 90 decision packages that were submitted, and so there is a lot to digest. So if you have a question about what's included, we are happy to help illuminate some of the changes. Are there any other items or questions that that members of the council have at this moment, or things that you would like to share that you're thinking about? Just put out on the table for your colleagues to know or be aware of at this time. Okay. So if there are no more questions, I will turn it back over to the mayor, who will continue this meeting of the Budget Committee until our next convening tomorrow. Mayor, you are muted.
You're on mute. You're on mute. Get your daughter to get you off mute for you.
There we go. I got it. Sorry, I've got like 15 pages open on my screen here. All right, so let's see, get to the end here at the end. Here it is. Okay, due to the COVID-19 public health crisis, the meeting will be conducted virtually.
Sorry, Mayor. There is one sentence before that that should be highlighted.
It says the following statement at the conclusion of the work session.
Okay, there is one more sentence that, sorry, I added in. I
don't have it, so why don't you read it?
I will, I believe you need to, but I will put it in the chat for you. Give me just a moment, and my apologies, everyone. This is the budget law, as if we needed this process to be more confusing. There is, we have to officially continue the meeting of the Budget Committee. And so I am going to put this into the chat, Mayor, and if you could
just give me the date. Give me the date and the time.
The date is Wednesday, May 5th at 6 p.m.
All right, good. So this, we are concluding our hearing of the Budget Committee. We're continuing this item. We're continuing the work of the Budget Committee to a time certain, May 5th at 6 p.m.
And then you can say the other things that are in the list.
The other things that I just deleted, you mean? Relevant. Those things in the list? Hang on. Due to the COVID-19 public health crisis, the meeting will be conducted virtually and will live stream on the city's YouTube channel. Public comments and testimony may be submitted through an online intake form or for participants registered in advance of the Budget Committee meeting. Hopefully those are the right talking points.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We survived.
Good job. Thank you. Excellent work.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.